Hello everyone, welcome to Eclectic Spacewalk Conversations. I'm your host Nicholas McKay, and today my guest is Mike Elias, founder of Idea Markets, which allows the public to establish credibility without relying on corporate media. Welcome to Conversations, Mike.
Thank you very much.
So let's jump into our first section on your personal journey. Where were you born?
I was born in Cincinnati, Ohio,
Okay.
known as a flyover state to some, but as a fly from state to natives.
Okay.
And I'm referring, of course, to Ohio's long and weird history of being the birthplace of great aviators like Neil Armstrong, for example.
Okay.
So Neil Armstrong got about as far from Ohio as anybody possibly could, and he went back. So I think that says something good about Ohio there.
Right. And then how long did you stay there?
I grew up there in the same house until my early teens, and then my family moved to Philadelphia and then Los Angeles. So I've kind of lived around in the second half of my life, and went to college in California at UC Santa Cruz.
Okay.
And that's been the journey. I didn't grow up as a mover, and then I kind of became one.
Okay.
Became a traveler,
And then, so when you were young, what did you first want to be when you grew up? If Neil Armstrong and these aviation things, is that what you wanted to be, or something different?
To be completely honest with you, which I was not expecting to do.
Okay.
I wanted to be an airplane. Not a pilot, I wanted to be an airplane.
Literally
Let's
just fly.
eliminate the middleman here. And so, that was my first aspiration. And then, I've had a series of deep interests that have kind of changed what that aspiration is just over time. I've gone through a bunch of things, yes.
So those early interests, like who were your influences? Thinkers, books, parents, community, like?
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, as far as thinkers, my family is Jewish and agnostic, so I didn't grow up around any particular religious institution, and my dad is a very thoughtful and conversation-loving kind of guy.
Okay.
So we would, talk about everything, and we also enjoy comedy a lot. And my first, philosophical initiations were actually from, I want to say, George Carlin.
Okay.
A great comedian,
Great
George
comedian.
Carlin.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I didn't really grow up thinking about religion and philosophy all that much, though I prefaced it by saying I didn't really have any pressure to either.
That's good. So it was an open
yes.
kind of layout of whatever kind of you were interested in.
Pretty much, yeah. And
good.
then I saw George Carlin when I was maybe 12, and I thought, you know what? That doesn't make sense.
Yeah, that doesn't make sense.
And so my first philosophical inclinations were becoming an atheist, taking a position on that from George Carlin, and my dad also happened to be an atheist, so we could kind of, riff on that.
Yeah,
and,
sure.
Lots of conversation ensued.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was more like growing up in the South, Southern Baptist, like you're just inundated with that from day one. I mean, Wednesday night service, Sunday night, Sunday morning and Sunday night, and that wasn't all the time, but it was like there. And then in middle school, it was a denominational kind of thing. And so for me, being the reason why I became a journalist was just like, I started asking questions, and then obviously that's
not allowed.
Yeah, exactly.
Who let that happen?
Who let that go? So, I mean, for me, it's interesting that you bring up kind of philosophy and religion, because mine was like way longer or later on in life as well, before I started to think for myself. So how are those influences changed? So if those early philosophy, is George Carlin still an influence for you? How's that kind of evolved over time?
I owe the man eternal gratitude, just as an early influence. So there's a way in which he'll always be a part of me, and I'll always appreciate that.
Sure.
My influences, though, in a more mature sense, have definitely evolved a lot since then. I was a rather annoying type of atheist for the next 5 or 6 years.
Okay.
Before it was cool.
Okay.
I'll say that. Reddit wasn't a thing yet. It wasn't, there was no euphoria yet. It was just regular annoyingness.
Yeah.
And there were things I wanted to figure out. I got shot down by a girl I had a crush on when I was about 13, and I went, that was not pleasant. I I want the future to go better.
Yeah. Right.
So I went online and found the early germ of what eventually became the seduction community and learned about how psychology of romance and attraction and relationship works.
Yes.
And quickly found that the more superficial answers to that question were about as satisfying as they were transformative, which is not at all. If you just ask for a pickup line, you might be able to, seem cool for a second, but then you can't back it up and nothing ever works.
Good point.
So as that frustration became the new one, the question was, what does being a good man entail? How can I be that, etc.? The questions got much deeper in a psychological sense. And that eventually led me to spirituality, which I did not intend to find at all. But I started meditating and studying consciousness and just realizing the way that in terms of, in the context of being a good man, that people can pick up on the most minute infinitesimal details of your vibe. And if it's not unconsciously competent, if it's not unconsciously cultivated, you're gonna have a bad time.
Oh yeah. Carl Jung talks about that a lot, in his archetypes. It's like, I can't remember exactly what it is, but it's parsed out as, if you don't make the unconscious conscious, the unconscious will then rule your life and you will call it fate. And it's like, oof, that's heavy. Because to be honest, like, I really think there's a good proportion of zombies out there. They're kind of just like going through the motions of things. I don't want to put myself on some, tower or anything like that, but at the same time, like, I think critically asking yourself, what does it take to be a good man? What does it take to be a good steward of information? What does it get, asking those questions, that's half the battle. Sure,
it's definitely not, socially encouraged all too much. But in any case, I wanted to tie this together for you. Sure. In order to handle the unconscious things that sort of come out and get built into your vibe in a way that you can't control and consciously steer, it's basically the opposite of a pickup line. It's a deep kind of emanation that is a result of a totality of your being. And I saw you had Vinay Gupta here. I know he knows about that.
Yes. Well, the more souls or something like that,
so,
that level.
So without any intention of doing so, I've started having synchronicities and started meditating and studying consciousness, studying what is the self and all that stuff, and started to have spiritual experiences in meditation that were just the most real of the real. I don't care what the truth is, I just want to know what it is.
Oh, okay. Yeah. The contents don't necessarily matter, it's just that we're going towards it.
Yes, and that was the key that unlocked my death grip on atheism and, unlocked just a torrent that would reverse my position completely.
Right.
And so I've had this great fortune to be on two ends of this extreme spectrum on a very intense topic, and that's a big part of my intellectual maturation.
Yeah. And is that is meditation a continual thing that you keep up now, or is there other ways that you kind of? I mean, like psychedelics is one way people do it. Meditation is another to kind of keep yourself grounded.
Yeah, I don't have much experience with psychedelics, but meditation has always been extremely rewarding. More recently, it's taken some different forms, but unlocks things that are inaccessible otherwise.
Ooh, I like that. Unlocks things that are inaccessible otherwise. Okay. So if we go back a little bit to when you're at UC Santa Cruz, right?
Yes.
What were you studying, and then what happened after to let's catch up till now?
Sure. Well, I didn't really want to go to college.
Okay.
The proposition didn't make sense, but my parents always wanted me to, and blah blah blah, and it was kind of the easy thing to do. I actually dropped out immediately and then went back and dropped out again and went back. It's all kind of long and convoluted.
Okay.
But
wasn't quite sure. Now's the time. Well, maybe not now.
I've always been sure that I shouldn't go to college. And I had trouble following through on that conviction on a permanent basis. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, okay.
So I studied philosophy because I had a head start.
Okay.
I've been working on problems that philosophy deals with for some years beforehand, so I figured I can just kind of skate.
Yeah.
And I was aided by my background. Let's put it that way.
Oh, okay.
And that's sort of the course that I took through it. Yeah.
Okay. And then so after that, you move here to LA, and you've been here for how long now?
My family's been here for about 10 years, and I've been here off and on as I would skip from here to Santa Cruz to China to other places.
Oh, wow.
It's I've kind of hopped around, but my family's base has been in LA for about that time, and we're here now.
That's awesome. Mm-hmm. And then so we'll get into idea markets and more of that a little bit later, but what are you working on now aside from that? Because I know you kind of do some development of sorts.
Business development.
Yeah.
I'm not
actual
a coder.
development. Oh, no.
No.
Actual business development. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, you must have missed that.
Yeah, no problem.
Developing.
Yeah. You got half of it.
Yeah, half of it, yeah.
So I work for a company called Global Liquidity, and the founder was one of the pioneers of what came to be called high-frequency trading on Wall Street. Mm-hmm. And he's built a tool that allows order books and other trading data to be visualized in real time in 3D. So instead of looking at a traditional trading interface that looks like Binance or Coinbase or Bloomberg Terminal, which they all feel kind of like dealing with spreadsheets or doing your taxes. It's all very foreboding, and there's kind of an ivory tower barrier about it. So what James, the founder of Global Liquidity, has built is a 3D framework for rendering live data in 3D so that it looks more like Guitar Hero. It feels more like Guitar Hero. And not only is it much friendlier and sort of dopamine inducing for lay people who've never seen such a thing, but it gives you an entire dimension more information immediately.
Right.
When you take an order book, a two-dimensional order book, which shows this instance order structure, the buys and sells and the quantities of each, and they flash and change about every second or so, and you can see what's going on right now.
Right.
You're looking at 2 dimensions of data in kind of a confusing way. When you look at this in 3D, and I brought my laptop so I can show you later, after the break, you can see how the order book evolves. So the front row is the present time. The front row is equivalent to this, but then it also shows maybe 60 rows back. So you can see you have a history of the order book and how orders are being placed and removed. And you can see at a microscope level what traders and algorithmic bots and exchanges are doing.
That's very interesting. So it's not necessarily like you have a regular XY axis and then a Z axis where you're like modeling data, but it's more like you're taking that two-dimensional data and then just putting it in a different kind of interface, right? Like a user experience for the and then or is it more in depth even than that?
Yeah, you are taking data and visualizing it with a Z axis.
Right.
The labels are different from what you would expect.
I see.
The labels of the axes are different than in a two-dimensional chart.
Sure.
But what you're able to see with that is the context behind a two-dimensional order book, which compared to it doesn't really have as much utility as you might think by its prevalence.
And then so, I mean, not to get too off topic, but it kind of seems similar now, like with the stock market at an all-time high and stuff like that. But then as well, as we just talked about ivory towers and such, like I would think it's like 3% of Americans own stocks or something. And so it's like, it's such a small percentage, but like, how do you feel like working in such a high prestige, like kind of industry as the stock market, Wall Street?
Our mission is to undo that trend. Is to cross the chasm from experts who are the nerds who go, oh yeah, Binance, I'm totally going to learn how to use that. And take it to the 4 billion gamers around the world, put it in a web browser on their mobile device, and they can sit here like this using their thumbs to trade.
Right.
So it's allowing retail traders to have the same access to markets as institutions and the same power to execute trades as institutions, but with the ease of a video game and the accessibility and comprehensibility of a video game. So the goal is to reverse that entirely.
Right, and you would even say that it is quote like gamified or so. I mean, that's literally the point of these things, to get the user to get more involved, incentive based, things like that. Is it a gamification of this? Is that as easy as you can say it, or no?
If I'm going to nitpick,
yeah, no, go ahead.
Yeah. What I understand of gamification is it's kind of about stratification and levels and getting people to progress in a thing. Maybe
I see.
I'm misunderstanding.
No.
That's
that's
the connotation that I get.
Right.
But in terms of making a thing that is less game-like into something that is more game-like, absolutely, that's the goal.
Okay. That's very interesting. And then what has been kind of the success over time? How long have you guys had a product out, or what's kind of been the progression?
So we got funded in November 2018 by Block Tower, Ari Paul.
Yeah, okay.
And since then, we've built a 3D order book that shows all the trading pairs on 16 top exchanges and can embed in a website extremely easily with just an iframe.
Wow.
And the framework underlying all of that is open source as well. So if you want to graph social sentiment data or network data or blockchain transaction data, or if you want to do trading data in a different way, that's all available for the world, anybody to use and to create 3D views like this.
Very interesting. So the stock market is really just your first use case, or like, basically proof of concept, because it seems like with what you just said there, that there's a whole, infinity of other things that you could kind of do with that.
Yes. So I should have been clearer at the beginning. Our first foray here is actually crypto markets only.
I see.
So when I say the
Good
top
point.
16 exchanges, I mean Binance, Coinbase, that kind of thing. Yes,
for sure.
So we don't have anything plugged into the stock market yet, though what we have could easily do that.
Yes.
We just need a developer to go.
Eventually, that's kind of where it's moving towards, yes.
Yes. And there's been a lot of interest in doing that, but we aren't going to dedicate the resources ourselves at this moment.
Right.
Yes, what was your question again?
No, I mean, that was basically, it was moving towards how that can become, I was basically going to transition into, is this really the start of what you kind of had with idea markets, and kind of like seeing things in different views? Because like, I think in ideas markets, it's very interesting that you are putting data that normally people wouldn't even think about, but we absolutely are using it. Prestige, notoriety, etc. And then like gamifying that, I think that's a very interesting thing. But we'll talk about that on the next segment. But what I wanted to talk to you about now is like, what was your, if any, background in cryptocurrency before? Did you have anything at all? Did you know about it and then this kind of came, or was this kind of, you were already in the mix, if you will?
Sure. So my interest in crypto kind of came from a lucky break.
Okay.
I've known for a long time that I've wanted to work remotely and just be able to make a living from a laptop. And
That's
I'm
nice.
not a coder.
Yeah.
So I did some freelance executive assistant, operations manager type work, operations consultant type work. And one of the first gigs that I got in 2017
Okay.
was with an ICO during the summer.
In the bubble.
in pre-bubble, in the summer bubble.
Okay, summer bubble.
The little bubble. Yes.
Yeah.
So it was with an ICO company called Health Chain. The founders were Stanford faculty in the psychiatry department, and were creating basically EMR on the blockchain, electronic medical records on the blockchain.
Okay, sure. That was a huge thing in like 07, 08 with them trying to do it at a national level. But then,
with like Epic and whatnot.
Yeah, all that other. Yeah.
Anyway, that's an enormous catastrophe and a mess. Not the ICO. I mean, the ICO's defunct now, but the situation is a mess, because you look at the chart and you see, cost of doctors goes like this, cost of administration goes like this.
Oh,
it's
totally. Yes,
because all of the redundant records and everything. So anyway, that was their mission, to raise money on an ICO. Do EMR on the blockchain, which they already had, basically all the software for. The devs were excellent. So I became intimately familiar with the industry then. I was in charge of, a lot of their fundraising and marketing and things like that. And when the atmosphere of the crypto markets and the investment markets sort of outpaced the founders' comfort level for the point where they were in their lives. They had, a budding family and
yes.
other practices that they couldn't detach themselves from in time and things
Sure.
like that. Sure. And just a different kind of set of priorities that couldn't keep up with the extremely fast-paced crypto markets.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
The bar for ICO investment went like this.
Oh, yeah.
It used to be white paper and a big name, and then it became white paper and a big name and a product, and then it became white paper and a big name and a product and traction. Like it went like this. It just skyrocketed. So we started when the bar was down here and hadn't executed on enough by the time the bar was up here.
Sure.
So I parted ways with them and wanted to stay in the industry because the technology and the spirit really fascinating and energizing.
Oh, I mean that was originally my thing into it. I think it was 2012. I bought one Bitcoin for like $230 for a Christmas present to myself.
Wow.
So it was like, because I just believed in like you said, the community, like the people, the idea, and then it just went wild after that, and then when Ethereum came out, I thought that was way interesting, and like you said, I talked to Vinay Gupta about that and his launching of that, and that's just crazy to me, just crazy. But then to see it now kind of bounce back, in the last couple years after the bust and stuff, I think it either shows that Bitcoin is really the only thing in terms of like currency, but then Ethereum, the network, the DAOs and stuff like that, like there really is something there. There's something, and whether we're just first use cases and just freaks and geeks level, and it's not even become mainstream, that's okay. But I'm totally, I love the crypto community. It gets a little much sometimes, but I like the kind of anarcho, the kind of nature of it, that they're kind of pushing back and being contrarians, the memes, that kind of stuff like that. So we'll get into basically like ideas markets a little bit more, as we said, but my journalism story is a little interesting, and that's what I originally found you out. I was a one-man band in the economic downturn. So before, when I went to school, it was, okay, a reporter, an editor, and a camera person. And then basically the economic downturn said, no, you're a one-man band doing all three of those jobs, and then now we're going to pay you a salary of $23,000 a year in the middle of Illinois, Iowa. So like I have a personal kind of thing with journalism and truth, because that original thing of looking at things in a journalistic way pushed me towards philosophy. And I think you have a lot of, interesting takes on that. So philosophy, who is your favorite kind of philosophers now? I mean, is it existentialists? Is it, theorists? Because that really, who you're following, what you're reading and stuff really dictates kind of worldviews, philosophically at least.
Yeah, I have a variety of favorites.
Okay.
I hope most philosophy fans would tell you.
Hopefully you would.
And some favorites are William James.
Okay.
Who was not only a great philosopher, but one of the founding fathers of psychology. His influence in America was, on a similar level to that of Freud.
Sure.
And he's perhaps less caricaturable than Freud, but had absolutely monstrous contributions. And his philosophy was likely informed by that. I'm referring particularly to pragmatism and the idea that the value of an idea is in terms of its effects, how useful it is. So that's an epistemic leaning that is different from straight empirical science.
Sure.
And yet yields access to things that empirical science doesn't really have a reference frame for. So that's a very light intro to why I like William James. I also like Wittgenstein.
Love it, yeah.
And I would also say Hegel, though I have to confess I haven't really read Hegel.
Okay.
I'm just a big fan of the Hegelian dialectic, the thesis, antithesis, synthesis, as a model for looking at the world and at various phenomena. And we can go into more detail at any of those later. But that's
so for William James, was it, I've only read a little bit of Dubliners, and I still have, Ulysses is still on the list. It's up there with like Infinite Jest,
Is that Henry James?
No, William.
Ulysses?
Yeah. Isn't that William James?
No.
No. Am I confusing authors now?
That's all right.
I think that's James' last name.
His brother Henry James is a novelist.
Oh, that's exactly okay.
I don't
his
know.
Brother.
His brother. Okay.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. But Wittgenstein, and then also, I mean, his biggest thing was the Tractus philosophy.
Tractatus, right?
Yeah, Tractus, and then one of his big things was the duck-rabbit kind of illusion.
Yes.
That kind of gets subscribed to him.
Mm-hmm.
And then who was the last person you said?
I said Hegel, but
Hegel.
I haven't actually read Hegel.
I haven't read
personally.
too much of Hegel.
We haven't gotten all personal, but I use the thing that gets attributed to him all the time.
Okay.
All the time.
Got you. Okay, cool. Well, we're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll be talking about the power of heuristics and narratives. Stay tuned. Okay, and we are back to conversations with Mike Elias of Idea Markets. First, we're going to talk about heuristics. So heuristics are shortcuts, different ways of seeing things. We talked briefly in the first section. Do you have any heuristics that stand out to you that you use in daily life or love, talk about?
I absolutely do, and I'm sure I'll remember most of them as soon as we're done. However, I'll start with the Hegelian Dialectic, which is a useful filter for controversy. When there are two sides fighting in intractable manner, there tends to be some way in which the strengths of each side can be resolved and the weaknesses of each side to be eliminated. And that's the antithesis, thesis, antithesis, synthesis. So you have the thesis and the antithesis kind of fighting, and then there is a way of proposing a solution or of configuring the conversation so that the strong points of each side remain and can coexist, and the weak points lose their influence.
Yeah.
Yes.
Sounds like non-zero sum, like a non-zero sum game.
Yes. So when there is a perpetual debate and controversy, kind of playing the same notes over and over, it tends to be because the framing of the debate is inadequate to allow for the exploration of nuance or the articulation of a resolution. That doesn't mean there isn't a resolution. It doesn't mean that we're not capable of coming up with one and having a consensus. It's just a stuck point. And the existence of the Hegelian dialectic and the successes I've repeatedly seen personally, you can't necessarily replicate philosophical insight on a mass scale.
Sure.
That necessarily.
Yeah.
Gives me eternal optimism that any protracted debate within oneself or on a societal scale has a resolution, has a way of moving forward in a productive way, that you can have it all.
Right.
Both sides can be happy. So
in some way, shape, or form, like there's some equilibrium way that like deals with all the ups and downs of your position, my position, the context, just everything.
It's a third dimension.
Got it.
The analogy I like to use, it's like a bicycle. When you're learning to ride a bike, you can, if you're going real slow, it's easy to fall to the left or fall to the right. But if you go straight, neither happens. There is a direction in which a conversation can move that has neither the pitfalls of one side or the other. All that's necessary is for both sides to go in that direction.
Right.
And that's easier said than done. But I find that framework to be a helpful heuristic when looking at controversy.
So let's take it a little bit further.
Sure.
Let's get a little crazy.
Please.
So philosophically, with that, do you believe that dialectic is a or I don't want to say problem, is it uniquely human in terms of like here on Earth, or do you think that that's like a more broader kind of naturalistic kind of bedrock state? You know what I mean? Like with other trying to get into other beings and stuff.
Bring it on.
Because humans, like you could tell that we're very social creatures, and other creatures may not be that social. So I'm just trying to think about like how you could frame that in terms of, was that a uniquely human thing?
I think the Hegelian dialectic is part of the physics of ideas.
Okay, I like that.
And I mean that in exactly as abstract a way as that sounds.
Sure.
The end.
I like that. Okay. So, you're familiar with non-zero sum games, though?
Yes.
Right. So, is that something that you kind of ascribe to when even just looking at problems in yourself, like that you're dealing with? Because for me, in the last kind of, I want to say a couple months that I've wrote that essay and stuff, now I just see it. Do you see this kind of dialectical wager or dialectic more so now that you're seeing it everywhere, like your subconscious is working on it?
I want to make sure I understand your question properly.
Yeah.
You're asking, do I see the heuristic in play in the world often?
Yes.
Yes, I absolutely do. One example, one of the easier examples, because it has a large time scale and it's a hot topic, is cultural views on sex.
Okay, sure.
The history of recorded history tends to be religion dictating views on sex and being oppressive and saying it's basically bad, don't do it, it's bad.
Sure.
And modern culture has rebelled against that and said, no, it's good, free love,
biology,
etc., etc. And there's an antithesis there. And what a lot of people are realizing now is that there are consequences to unbridled sexuality. It's not that pleasure is bad or that sex is bad or that it's inherently sinful or anything like that. But what it is fundamentally, neither sinful nor good, is powerful. And when you have something powerful, you have to treat it with the respect and discipline and the right relationship to it that it deserves. And that relationship is neither total excessive oppression or excessive expression.
Yes.
So discipline, an approach to sexuality that involves discipline, is emerging in some subcultures, and particularly online and whatnot. And I'm a big fan of that because it is the right one after a very long, social battle between two extremes.
Sure.
It's a disciplined, deliberate, conscious approach to sexuality is potentially could solve every human problem. Yeah. Literally everyone.
Wow, that's pretty prophetic, I guess you could say. So what is your ideas on like pendulum swings? Because what you just described is almost a pendulum swing. It was at this place, and then it went all the way here. And is it really that? Is it always in the middle?
No.
Yeah, that's a good point too.
No.
Yeah.
When pendulums swing repeatedly, it might be a pretty good sign that it's not the middle. That the middle is not where to go, or it would have been maybe obvious. And also, a lot of things are not really measurable on a spectrum. You have
okay, that's a good point.
But I don't want to digress too much. But in general, I like the sexuality example of the Hegelian dialectic because it's so clear and useful. But the answer is no. It's not necessarily in the middle, whatever that might seem to be.
Yeah, sure. Okay. And then let's talk about another kind of interesting, I guess you could say heuristic, if it will, but for me as a storyteller is very synonymous is narratives. What kind of we tell ourselves about things. We tell ourselves, stories about history. We tell our stories about, as you said, sexuality of sorts. So what exactly is a narrative? And then we'll get into what exactly is a fiat narrative in sorts.
Sure. What is a narrative? That's a little abstract even for me, but I will concede that in order for a culture to kind of hang together, we all kind of have to agree on what world we live in.
Like a worldview, if you will.
Or just a vague definition of reality. And I think when I say narrative in a kind of vague, all-encompassing way, I think that's what I'm referring to. Just a story with a general social consensus, which if you agree, you might be perceived as sane. Like we can argue whether we live in a fascist state or an anti-state or whatever. We can argue that till the ends of the earth.
Sure.
But if I say we live on Venus, that's not a narrative that's going to garner a lot of consensus.
Sure.
So when I say narrative, I think the main function is just to have some sort of starting place socially.
Right, and that's huge because, I mean, honestly, where you start is half of where you're going, I guess you could say. What the goals are when you initially set out on things like that. So Mike, we're going to talk a little bit about fiat narratives. So in your blog post, you wrote a great post of some examples of this, but let's set it up. Centralized media institutions create, quote, fiat narratives by forcing self-serving interpretations of reality on the public. In the same way that fiat currencies are valuable only because governments say they are, fiat narratives are true only because media corporations say they are. So just a little bit of framing, fiat currencies, the dollar, the euro, etc., they get value by central banks, governments, working in tandem to basically say what their value is. And then fiat narratives are only true because media corporations kind of frame them that way. So let's kind of dive into that.
Sure.
So fiat narratives.
Sure. Fiat narratives. First, I can't take credit for the term because Ben Hunt of Epsilon Theory came up with it first.
Okay.
I thought I had come up with it, but someone helpfully informed me that there was someone even cleverer than I.
Mm.
And fiat, the word, is Latin for "let there be."
Oh.
In a lot of colleges, fiat lux, let there be light.
There
are a lot of.
I didn't know that.
Yes.
Okay.
So when you're saying "let there be money," you're fiat money. That's where it comes from.
Right.
And fiat narratives, let this be true. That's what they're saying.
Sure.
It's truth by declaration, rather than by rigor.
Rigor. Yes.
Or something like that. So that's what's meant by fiat narratives, and I think that's clear now.
Cool. And then we'll go through some examples. So media corporations have near limitless power to enforce fiat narratives using tactics like these. So limiting the scope of discussion. So Democrat versus Republican, you kind of put two people or two sides against each other, and there's no third, or there's no nuance, or there's no fourth way, etc.
Yeah. In order to perpetuate or keep alive a narrative that doesn't make sense under scrutiny, one way to do that is to allow people to sort of vent outrage at each other in a cyclical manner.
Sure.
It doesn't matter what the answer is if you're asking the wrong question. So this is a tactic that corporate media use to perpetuate a narrative that they would like to be true by fiat, by declaration, by preventing the right answer from being an option on the table.
Sure.
For preventing satisfaction by limiting the scope of discussion, yes.
And then if that's one aspect, let's go to, I guess, one side of the spectrum, which is the great firewalls like in China, that literally you can't even go on certain websites, and that's just the way it is. If you go on the internet, unless you're on a VPN or something that, then you're just not on it. And so that alone shows the totalitarian-esque, authoritarian-esque aspect of that?
Yes, that's a totalitarian way of perpetuating a fiat narrative.
Sure.
The Chinese government wants you to believe X. Well, we're just going to not let you read about not X.
Right.
And it's pretty simple and straightforward.
So if we move, I guess, from the less abstract to the more specific, then it would be things like distributing airtime. I mean, $4 billion of free airtime went to Donald Trump in 2016. Maybe that had an influence, maybe it didn't.
Yes, well, there's a famous quote by Les Moonbase, the then CEO of CBS.
Okay. Oh, yes. Actually, I remember this.
Yes, I'll bet you do as a journalist.
Do.
Yes, he said, Donald Trump may not be good for America, but he sure is good for CBS.
Oof.
And that might not be verbatim, but it's close.
It's close.
It's close.
And when you're head of CBS, one of the top four networks in the nation, that's saying something.
Yes. So it illustrates the broken incentive mechanisms that corporate media has in terms of doing its duty to inform the electorate.
Sure. And then also, sponsoring entertainment and media. Right now the NFL playoffs are going on, and there's huge patronage in terms of nationalism, like showing jets flying over, et cetera. And then also you go into like the CIA involvement in media, or the Hurt Locker, Zero Dark 30, et cetera.
Yes, and the involvement of government agencies like the CIA, like the Department of Defense, for example, lent the Navy's planes to Top Gun in order to help them. The military is often involved in the production of military movies.
They have to be, because it wouldn't be happening.
It's more difficult to DIY an F-14 on an aircraft carrier. I bet that's true. But that's one way that the government allows media to exist that it can sort of steer or approve of or have some kind of message control on. And also, the New York Times has a pre-approval process, the CIA pre-approval process. Yeah. That when sharing something important with the public, they run it by the CIA for national security concerns. But the Constitution doesn't say we will not inhibit the freedom of the press for national security. It says we will not inhibit the freedom of the press.
Period.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
So there have been constitutional, absolutely fundamental breaches of what media is supposed to be and do for America and for the world. So government agencies are involved in all these sneaky ways, and I believe it was Bernstein of Woodward and Bernstein, yes. The Watergate guys,
Watergate, yep.
Wrote a fantastic expose on this, on the CIA's involvement in the media, and that's readily available online. I can send you a link.
I mean, even going past the Pentagon Papers, but like the Panama Papers recently shows how much celebrity is kind of now a newer thing that's just, they have governments, celebrities, all this money in tax havens, basically, just hanging out. And then that was, these papers come out and then
they blow over. and the Afghanistan papers.
Oh, it's recently, yes.
Yes, much absolutely. More recently and much quickly into the womp womp zone.
Yeah, exactly.
Very telling,
yes,
you could say.
Well, and then also, I have a couple others. This just made me think about like whistleblowers in general. I mean, you think of Chelsea Manning with the cables to like Julian Assange, to then basically it goes out on WikiLeaks, and then we have all of this corruption at the highest of levels up to the drone program up until Obama, literally killing a United States citizen, Anwar al-Awlaki, who's like 16 years old. That's insane, but that's, again, the media kind of positioning how that's okay, or this current things with the Iran. So it's the whistleblowers are just very interesting because that just throws a wrench in everything. But you've seen the treatment of Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning to then why would people, or Thomas Drake for the NSA, Snowden, et cetera. You can name them all, and then they've been vilified by the exact media that should be the people pushing that.
Yeah, and given that it's winter in Russia, he probably is Snowden.
I'll give you 2 snaps of that. All right. Here, so moving on to the 2 other examples that may be more, instead of abstract, but more specific or soft, would be scripting local news on a national scale.
Yes, there was a viral video that illustrated this very cleverly not too long ago, and it still makes the airwaves, pun intended, now and then. And it ends with, about 100 local journalists saying, and this is a big threat to democracy. This is extremely dangerous for democracy. And they say, all together, synchronized into the camera, this is extremely dangerous for democracy.
Exactly.
And you have all these, and it's orchestrated so that you can see the sort of strings being pulled that create a uniform word-for-word narrative that's being delivered in an extremely centralized way. Mm-hmm. And that's extremely dangerous to democracy.
Absolutely. And then the lowest, I think, well, not the lowest, but I guess you could say the most soft or specific is just picking what goes on the air. And so as me as a former journalist, like, I don't know, but to clue people in, basically every morning, usually you have a news meeting where everyone comes in, you say what you're working on, either for that day in the future, and then the news director, producers dictate right then and there what stories you're covering, what stories you're not. So whether or not you'd cover, say, the local fashion parade, or do you go and then use your time to research, the corruption charges in the police department, etc. So I think a big thing of that is the movie Spotlight. I don't know if you've seen it.
I haven't seen Spotlight.
Okay. Fantastic, and exactly kind of what we're talking about. But long story short is basically that it was about the Catholic Church and Archdiocese in Boston, very religious, as you know, and that basically that was dictating the narrative on how the Boston Globe was reporting on that. And then it took literally a small group of journalists to then get that out. They stood to their guns, and then eventually the Pope resigned, Ratzinger, because he had facilitated the moving of, church prefects or people around or something like that Spotlight had reported on. It won the Oscar for the movie adaptation, but phenomenal how we don't have to cover Justin Bieber, as you said. We can cover Congress in a different way. There's different ways to do that. So just go into talking about like the specificness of this story versus that story, because that's as easy as one person's ideal viewpoint and what they're kind of being paid for at a network in a grand scheme.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then no amount, and as you said, no amount of public outcry or reasoned dissent can change fiat narratives if doing so would threaten the power of their issuers. So how much power does the New York Times, the paper of record, still have? How much power does, say, a local news station have in those kind of senses?
It's hard to quantify, and that's the problem.
Absolutely.
That's one of the problems that Idea Market aims to fix.
Sure. And then we'll get into that in a little bit. But those problems, let's talk about the tobacco strategy. We talked off air before that, but it basically was, the tobacco strategy was in the 1980s, even before that, 40s, 50s, 60s, where they basically poo-pooed the research linking smoking and lung cancer. And that they just, put out media report after media report or narrative after narrative. And then eventually it took us 40 years to get over that. But the same people that are doing that are now doing that for climate change. And so let's talk about how, propaganda, if you will. A lot of people think about propaganda as something as like Stalin or way back when in those kind of times, but propaganda is very subtle even nowadays in terms of targeted advertising, etc. So I guess let's just riff on how propaganda kind of influences these networks, especially into like digital networks such as Facebook, Google, Twitter.
Have you heard the name Edward Bernays?
Yes. Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
so
of course.
Edward Bernays is Sigmund Freud's nephew, which you know, but I'm saying just in case anybody hasn't heard yet.
Yeah.
And he pioneered the field of public relations about 100 years ago.
Bernays. Oh, yes, of course. Yes. Now it's,
He used Freud's theories about the unconscious to help institutions shape public narratives. And the word propaganda already had kind of an icky connotation.
Oh, yeah.
So they called it public relations. And that's an industry that still exists. And is probably not the only instance of itself. But in any case, we have a very long tradition of controlling the narrative on an institutional scale. And we're only getting better at it, especially now that we can have targeted advertising and filter bubbles and algorithms that not only are closed source, but a lot of people don't really care about. You're having fun on Facebook, why would you look under the hood? Do you have the technical tools to do so? The power of propagandists has increased with the power of anybody to access information. So who was it? 1985, he wrote Amusing Ourselves to Death.
Oh, Neil Postman.
Neil Postman.
Great, one of the best, dude, that was a prophetic book.
Yes.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
Yes. And Aldous Huxley, who said, or was it Huxley? Anyway, somebody said, there's no need to really combat the truth, just drown it in a sea of irrelevance.
Oof, yes.
And that's one of the frequent tactics that's employed now. It's very easy to get a quick dopamine hit. It's very easy to spark outrage and to kind of circumvent the critical faculties. Mm-hmm. And not only is it easy to do that, it's profitable. So one of the main ways propaganda propagates is just by pushing the buttons and cashing in when we can't resist. Right. And individuals have no antibodies necessarily. It takes a great deal of effort and discipline and more than most people have the luxury of developing. If people are just trying to survive or want to check Facebook on their smoke break to get a laugh or whatever, they don't have an arsenal to go up against an arsenal of propaganda powered by modern technology that exists to exploit and deceive them. So it's not really the public's fault that we're in the state we're in. It's a matter of who has power and what it's being used for and for what reason.
Great. And then so with that, I hope that we'll be inoculating ourselves with more antibodies.
Yes.
So we're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll talk idea markets. Hello and welcome back to Conversations. I'm here with my guest, Mike Elias of Idea Markets. First, let's talk about there may be an epistemic crisis, or maybe we're past the crisis and now in a revolution.
Yes, we are noticing the crisis now. And the crisis is we haven't really left the age of Galileo in terms of public knowledge. In Galileo's time, of course, the Catholic Church basically decided what everybody would believe. And when Galileo said contrary-wise, his voice was suppressed and he was made to recant, etc. And the top-down power structure of narrative creation persists to this day. Science, of course, was very much inspired by Galileo's strategy of epistemology and observing things. But the narrative propagation on a more global and society-wide scale has not changed at all. And we are experiencing the effects of that and the inability of a centralized authoritative epistemology to adequately handle the nuances of the information age.
Right. And then science, let's, I guess, get science out of the way, because that's an epistemology in certain ways. So in that, like if we take science out of it, then obviously public discourse, ideas, values, history, etc. All those kind of things are dictating how these narratives go about.
Right.
So what is it made? What has kind of brought about this kind of noticing about the crisis? Is this the internet? Is it us just becoming more evolved in our kind of ways to see society, etc.?
The internet has been a tool for the realization of this, yes, as people are able to do research on their own and congregate into groups that share their beliefs and rely less on corporate media, which, despite its deceptive practices, has historically had a sort of unifying effect relative to now. So there's been this two-sided, double-edged sword
that's a good way to put it,
evolution, where people have more independent ability to research and less reliance on a centralized media agency, and at the same time, less capacity for a unifying narrative. Is that clear?
Yeah, definitely. And then Idea Market aims to change the incentive landscape for creating that common knowledge.
Yes.
So we talked about the importance of common knowledge.
Yeah.
So then why is it now? Why is it needed now? Because that double-edged sword seems, or the pendulums, why is it?
Sure. So historically, the best knowledge has never overlapped with common knowledge. Great knowledge and common knowledge have always been mutually exclusive. And that's not necessary anymore. We have the technology for that to not be true anymore. And we haven't taken advantage of it. There's no need to be told what to believe, basically, and policed or moderated, mediated between, like there was before the internet. Of course, for hundreds of years, a journalist who went to school and was trained and paid their dues and came up through the ranks of an organization that was trusted by industry and by the population to be a mediator between the edges of reality and first-hand sources on important stories, to mediate between all of that and the information consumer. It was perhaps the most efficient way to handle that problem. And now it's not only outdated, it's inadequate to the challenges of the information age.
And I mean, I think I love what you just said, the last word, inadequate, because today, being a human is way different than it was just 50 years ago, way different than it was just 10 years ago. And I think that like if you were to kind of visualize some of this information was almost at like a drip kind of, you'd get as much information as you could from the bodies at B, but then now it's just a fire hose. It's just the whole thing's off, information's coming, you don't know if it's good, if it's useful, is it bad, etc. So in terms of that, like what, well, let's go back, I guess, to the history of the idea. So how did this all first come to be? Like, were you just thinking and had an aha moment, or was it more of a first inkling and that grew and you just kept building on it?
I don't remember exactly how it started, but I knew I was relatively new to crypto and had just learned to use exchanges and trade and stuff, and was thinking about the incentives involved and how the markets were basically a measure of confidence, and if you were right, you made money, and if you were wrong, you lost money. And this seemed like an excellent way to sort knowledge in general. And so I began to try to figure out how using exchanges and markets and trading venues, one could represent the components of human knowledge in some way. It's to introduce those same sorts of incentives without interference by a centralized body, just people competing, to curate what we already know, what somebody already knows.
Right.
Because, as I said, the best knowledge tends to never overlap with the common knowledge. So if there's some freak in, Tahiti who has figured out in his basement how to cure cancer 50 years ago,
right,
there's not really a means by which we would know that.
Yeah.
So
and who knows what our trajectory and history would be from those little things throughout time. I guess you could say.
Right. So this is a human survival level issue, and we have the technology to access the best knowledge in a way that can be trusted to be organic, in a way that centralized control of media and narratives cannot be trusted. And it is time for us to use it.
And so from using that then, you I think this was something you tweeted, or I'm not for sure, we'll see about the attribution, but it was success is achieved not when lies disappear forever, but when the trend reverses from a competition to exploit, terrorize, and divide the public to a competition to serve, inspire, and unite it. Yes. That is a very different side of the coin. Yeah. Different objectives, different goals from the beginning. So how, like for success, I guess let's talk about what success and failure would be in terms of not exactly narratives, but I guess the idea for idea markets.
Sure. So idea markets changes the incentives of knowledge, common knowledge creation. Right now, if you're a media corporation, which in itself is kind of an anachronism, you have media, corporation. Well, which one is it?
Yeah, exactly.
Are you trying to inform or are you trying to profit?
Yeah.
Just the existence of such a thing as a media corporation is its own comment.
Right.
So in order for media corporations to profit, they have to do the things that result in retaining viewers. That often means encouraging polarization, because if you don't trust anyone else, you're not going to leave.
Sure. And
encouraging outrage, because if you're provoked, you're going to pay attention, even if it's negative attention.
Yep.
And fear, and using human psychological vulnerabilities to extract attention from us. We are basically being farmed by corporations that have access to our attention or profit from our attention. So the incentives there are to divide people so that they won't leave, to freak them out so that they won't turn it off, and so forth, to upset them so that they pay attention, and etc. So that's the direction that public knowledge is going. And the results of this, the effects of this, are readily apparent to literally everybody. There's not a baby born in Iraq that doesn't know there's a problem.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So what Idea Market does is it requires narratives to be backed by financial risk. So the way it works is it doesn't outright prohibit you from purchasing a high rank on the market and creating the appearance that you are well trusted. However, publishers that earn trust and earn this investment organically get that promotion for free. And it becomes increasingly expensive, prohibitively expensive, to fake that level of trust the more people participate. And as corporate media's attention worthiness not only continues to lag, but to be registered on this first global dashboard of what people really believe, they will be forced to either ignore the game or play it.
Right.
And if they ignore the game, they'll simply be left out. And if they play it, they will have to organically earn public trust.
Right, right. And then organically earn public trust. And that's through, I guess, prestige or the people. Well, let's go into how you would quantify that. Let's go into kind of how that kind of works,
Sure,
I guess
yeah.
you could say.
In terms of quantifying trust,
yes,
we're quantifying credibility. And the way Idea Market allows that to occur is by inviting people to buy tokens that represent a publisher, NewYorkTimes.com, FoxNews.com, Infowars.com, WikiLeaks.org, etc., in order to signal confidence. So in the same way that stock market exists so that the public can signal confidence in a company's future profitability, Idea Market is a decentralized marketplace that allows people to signal public confidence in a publisher's attention worthiness.
Yeah.
So that's the metaphor, the translation that's being done there. So in terms of measuring credibility, it's measured in risk. How much people have put into this to say, I bet that if more people see this, even more people than that will agree that even more people than that will want to see it.
Right.
And a purchase on Idea Markets is a wager on the attention worthiness relative to everything else in the market of a publisher. So if a corporation wants to compete with that, they will have to not only earn public trust compared to nothing, they'll have to earn it compared to any other potential choice the public might have.
Right.
So the way I would recommend that they do that is by scouting the hot small publications and absorbing their narratives, entertaining their theses, their evidence, bringing them into the conversation, because without taking on the investigative qualities of the publishers that are earning trust organically, there will be no way for a media corporation to continue to deserve trust.
Right. And then let's talk. This is also on the Ethereum network. So let's parse out exactly how this happens in terms of like coins, et cetera, tokens, et cetera. So Ethereum is a decentralized like marketplace. It's similar to Bitcoin. You also have tokens, Ethereum, Ether as they call it. But you guys are more running on the protocol, right? At the level of protocol. Am I familiar with that? Like the Ethereum, how exactly are you guys running on Ethereum? Is basically
yes, we're running on the Ethereum blockchain, and we use DAI for the currency. So MakerDAO is involved, and we're also using RDAI, which is a adaptation of DAI that allows tokens to earn interest because they are plugged into Compound. And Compound is a decentralized lending platform where people can take out collateralized loans using cryptocurrency trustlessly.
Oh, wow.
So when you make a purchase on Idea Market, the money that you spend to get a token representing your purchase is deposited and held into a Compound smart contract.
Oh, okay.
So that people can take out loans against it. And that money that you just spent in Idea Market earns interest.
Oh, wow.
And Idea Market then distributes that interest on your money disproportionately to market winners.
Wow. Okay, so again, incentives on every layer.
Yes.
Every layer.
Yes. It's the purpose of that is so that top publications have an incentive case for the long term.
Right.
If something's at the top, it's not necessarily just going to go down. There's a reason that something might persist over time, and if it does, it will benefit from the interest on deposits made by everybody else. So there's a possibility for blue chips to emerge. It's not necessarily going to be a constant cycle.
Right, right. And then the increased trust leads to increased visibility and credibility backed by public risk, not by corporations. Like that's the big kicker. And then also what's interesting about Ethereum is what you wrote here, and I didn't even think about this, but publications are impossible to remove from the list.
Yes.
And so I guess maybe this is a good time to then quickly talk about centralization versus decentralization.
Sure.
Because that's basically the rub, if you will.
Sure. So a centralized entity is one that has a specific set of servers and a specific set of buildings, or relies on a specific company, which can be shut down. If the government says, New York Times, we don't like you anymore, shut off your servers in Amazon or whatever, they can do that. There's a vulnerability here, a single point of failure.
Yes.
And most institutions and organizations are centralized in some way. It's just the way it's had to be up until recently. Mm-hmm. So the way a decentralized network works, like Bitcoin or Ethereum, on which Idea Market runs, is instead of having centralized servers that somebody can shut down, the network runs simultaneously on thousands or millions of independently owned computers around the world. And those belong to people who live in different countries, different companies, different governments that have different interests, and are not going to, come all under your thumb. If China says no more cryptocurrency, Switzerland might say, you know what, I like it. Right. We're going to keep it. So there's no governmental decree by which you can shut down a decentralized network. If you've read all the Harry Potter books, I'm going to spoil the end now.
Okay.
Where Voldemort
yes.
He maintains his life force. He stays alive by putting his soul into Horcruxes, into different objects, and spreading them across the ends of the earth. And as long as one of those is fine, he's fine, basically.
Yeah.
Ethereum and Bitcoin and other decentralized networks basically work like that. Right. It's basically a Horcrux system. That in order to take it down, you have to take them all down. And there are a lot, and they belong to a lot of different people.
And many different countries, many different creeds, many different ways of thinking.
Yes. Whereas one country might see it as a threat, another might see it as an opportunity. Sure. So even though one country might want you to stop, another country is going to want you to continue.
Hey, come on. Yeah.
Yes. So there's not going to be a single point of failure that some government can just say, you know what, enough of you.
Right. And when you mention public narratives being decided by private interests is basically what we're kind of going up against.
Yeah.
When we seek narratives, we naturally seek authority. That's something that you had also wrote. And then when seeking investments, we naturally seek value. So therefore, the best way to choose public narratives is with investment. It's almost that like skin in the game tactic or
100%,
heuristic.
100%. I haven't read Skin in the Game, but I'm very much inspired by quotes from it.
Yeah, I'll send you that blog post as well.
Thank you. Yes. No, it's a Taleb book. So
Taleb's great. I love it.
Yeah, in terms of seeking authority naturally. Yeah. The way society has been organized until now, especially in the last 100 or so years, is if the New York Times says it, I can't be blamed for believing it because the New York Times says it. Right. So when we seek authority, it's not because we're weak sheep. It's because we want to be able to talk to someone at work. It's because it's a basic functioning fabric of society.
Yeah, sure.
It is not a bug, but a feature that we naturally seek authority. We want to hold everything together and be able to function and communicate with our fellow man. So that has been a large part of the power that media corporations have had. In playing that necessary role of mediating between the world and the consumer. It's also created a medium for the consumer to relate to each other.
Yes.
If you believe, bob.wordpress.com more than you believe the New York Times, if that was a thing in 1975, you'd be a crackpot, and a lot of people still are. I'm a proud one. So, yes, there's a function to seeking authority, and it's a sort of social cohesion. And the problem, though, is that the social cohesion is being manufactured by corporations.
Right. And then so there's one thing before we kind of go into where it's moving, I guess, let's talk about one, I guess, aspect of critique, which I thought was great that you yourself were kind of pushing it out, is that when we seek authority, we don't just want to, rob Peter to pay Paul and put our authority in something else that's not. And so like markets in general, I mean, have not been very good at, say climate change, externalities and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And what you said was on one of your tweets was, I think, great, because idea markets can be implemented with abusive motives. So it seems extremely important to require certain criteria to protect against this list. What should they be? And you had some ideas: uncensorable, transparent, audible, simple, and then someone else threw in decentralized and properly incentivized, which we've kind of covered.
Sure.
So maybe let's talk about, I guess, the not exactly negative connotations, but just in case, like what that could mean at first, because I guess you got to build this credibility, right? And markets maybe not be the most efficient way, or let's just riff on that.
Sure. I'd like to roll it back a little bit before getting into that.
Yeah, sure.
And that is to say, I mentioned tying credibility to visibility in idea markets.
Sure.
It's not just another Reddit, another front page of the internet.
Good point. Yes.
Where people are going to go and be entertained or whatever. It's actually the back end of a new way of monitoring and filtering the information economy, the attention economy. And the first way it's going to do that is by eliminating fake news, corporate and otherwise.
Yeah.
And the way it's going to do that is with a browser extension.
Yep.
That a user has the ability to set the filter level on. So when you look at Idea Market and you see the top 10 are these publications, you can have a browser extension that says, only show me stuff from these top 10. Yeah. Or actually the first version that we're going to release is simply going to insert the Idea Market rank or market capitalization next to every link that you see. So whether you're on Facebook, you see WikiLeaks, and you see WikiLeaks is number 2 or something like that. Sure. And you can have a reference point for how much the public trusts the publisher whose link you're being invited to read.
Right.
And so by extension, fake news becomes extremely expensive.
Okay, these are the graphs that I saw on your web. Okay. So
yes.
Maybe briefly kind of show how, as over time, the ROI on the fake news goes down. Right, and then the public trust goes up eventually.
Yes. As the market winners of Idea Market have larger capitalizations, they raise the threshold of credibility as measured in risk.
For everyone involved.
For everyone.
Yes.
If the 100th publication has $1 million market cap, then in order to be even remotely credible, you have to spend $1 million, or you have to earn trust so that people invest $1 million and expect you to be attention worthy.
Right. And then so with idea markets, so if the first is a browser extension, let's kind of riff on what is the next. I know it's very hard to look into the future predictions. I'm assuming you want it to be awesome, but
no, it's not hard. It's secret.
Okay. That's a good point.
Secret plans.
Secret plans.
Yes. Though what I will tell you is I would like to open source the protocol itself so that it can be used to curate other things using markets like scientific papers, like patents, like products, so that fake reviews don't matter so much, and any category of thing that needs curation. But I think scientific papers is among the most important as well.
I mean, not to get too far, but scientific research papers, especially in how they're behind paywalls and stuff like that. That's very interesting kind of dynamic.
Yes.
Yeah. And then so our last question, I ask every guest here, one of the biggest proponents or heuristics, modalities of thinking that I kind of subscribe to is the overview effect. When astronauts get up past the atmosphere and look down at Earth, they see how thin the atmosphere is. They see a little ball, kind of floating in blackness. And what does that mean? And then also they see that there's only geographic boundaries, no international borders. And with that, they have a sense of collective, kind of consciousness with Earth, life, etc. If you were up on the space station or the moon, etc., and the entire world was looking up at you and you were kind of experiencing the overview effect, what would you say, or do you have anything to say?
I want to make sure I understand properly.
Yeah.
Do you mean I'm addressing the world?
Addressing the world. Looking up at you. Like in a metaphorical way, or say you're on the ISS and there's a camera link to your face and it's going to every single person in the world. Every single person. You can't just say...
It's a big responsibility.
I know. That's why I put it up to you. What do you have to say? Because, I mean, the biggest thing is, like, I think all of us have a very subjective, like, inspiring viewpoint of reality. And I just think that every single person from, you know, a boy in Bangladesh to a girl in France to a mother in Argentina all have something to say about this reality or the human experience, really. And I know that we talked earlier about trippiness, consciousness, etc., but you can say anything or nothing at all, or...
Look up Karezza.
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 Okay.
Look it up.
Look it up. Okay. Look up Karezza. Okay. I like that. Okay. All right. Well, we're going to look up Karezza. Karezza. Okay. Well, thanks for coming on Eclectic Spacewalk Conversations, Mike. I really appreciate it. And, you know, with that, until next time, ad astra.